Hey guys, today I'm going to be painting the Lotus Daimyo from Rising Sun. As you can see from that short blurb here, I think he turns out really great, and I'd love to show you how I got from a plain old gray, well, he's not gray, he's like a pink miniature, to the fully painted miniature you just saw. So let's get right into it. As always, I start with showing you any prep that I have to do. In this case, it's a lot of mold line. This guy actually has quite a bit here. Now, I'm able to remove it all. It ends up being nice and clean, and you know, you don't have to worry about that. It looks fine afterwards. You just kind of have to spend the time to do it, and it is a bit. It's more than I thought, and sometimes it's really hard to see, especially in these colored plastic miniatures. At least in my mind, if it's a lightly colored plastic like this, like yellow is terrible. It's really hard. But so it's like this bright pink kind of color to where, you know, if you struggle to see the mold lines but you want to remove them, go ahead and prime him in something like gray, and then remove them once you see them there. You'll see them a lot better there, and you don't even have to reprime. Just you know, clean the mold lines and then start painting. The primer doesn't have to be 100% coverage or anything like that for it to really do its job here. Alright, so as always I prime in gray, and actually I'm going to be priming some in white too, since I just bought some white. As you can see here, this is a hobby holder. This was sent by a patron of mine, by Jason Owens, and really that was a really nice gift, and I always really appreciate that. And I look forward to seeing kind of how it compares to the Citadel kind of paint holder that I have. You know, there's a big price difference and a big design difference. What I can say so far is I like it, but it's not perfect. So we'll have to see kind of where I end up with that. Where I'm going to end up here is not going insane, because this is white gray again, but unlike the Koi Daimyo that I painted earlier, I think it was actually my last video for a painted miniature. This was a lot easier because it's just a lot smaller of an area. There is a bit of texture underneath his robes there, by the way. I was actually kind of impressed by that. It makes it a little bit easier to paint. But he's got a scarf, and then he's also got some hand wraps he got to paint as well. And this will take a couple layers, so don't expect it to, you know, paint in one go here. Not with white. Now that we have kind of a base coat of white gray, we're going to get the flesh wash and only paint in the recesses here. Now, when it comes to shading white, it typically looks dirty when you do this, and so I'm being very careful to only paint in the recesses. And I'm going to come back and clean it up later. You'll see that it's the same thing I did in the Koi Daimyo video. So if you've seen that, you know exactly what I'm doing here. This is pretty much how I like to do white. I think it ends up being really clean looking. So if you want clean looking white and not dirty looking white, I think this is a good method to follow. Now, because I didn't, you know, really get any shade in the top portions, I can actually directly highlight. So I'm going to highlight in pure white. Again, this is one of the reasons why you don't base coat in white, because you can't highlight white, right? Right? I mean, white is as bright as it gets, so there is no going up, there's only going down. If I do a white gray, I can then highlight up to white, and then also bring it down as needed, which is kind of nice. Okay, white gray is out again, and this time it's pretty watered down, and I'm just going over everywhere where I put that flesh wash, and this is just going to clean it up a little bit, make it look not so dirty, make it look more uniform. In other words, it just slightly tints the white ever so slightly, and it gives it a clean shadow that looks a lot nicer. Warlock Purple is the color I chose to do all of his robes here. This is going to be all of the robes. They're going to be in this Warlock Purple color. So you're going to spend some time doing that. There's much longer portions of time spent on other things. This is actually pretty quick because nothing else is really painted. And as you can see, I'm using a big brush. I'll do a small brush later on, but for now this is totally fine with a big brush. As you can see now, I have the smaller brush out, so I didn't want to mess up the white here. Next up is Druchii Violet, and I'm going to kind of do this later on and a bit better. So the idea is, on the concept art, there is this kind of blue-purple two-tone cloth going on. And Coleman You're Not does it a lot with their concept art. That doesn't necessarily mean the cloth should actually be two tones. Otherwise, pretty much everybody has that. It's how they do shadow a lot of times. It's how they just kind of add colors to set a mood or do something like that. I don't know. I don't know what it is, but they do it a lot. The reason I did it here is because I'm going to add some detail work down there, and I want it to kind of be in that area. And because the detail work doesn't exactly match the concept art, having this here will I think, help sell the illusion. Here I'm just glazing a Warlock, the pink color, back onto this Druchii Violet, though I end up almost erasing it. Essentially, it's just not working out. So I'm going to come back to it later. But the idea here was to not have a hard line of purple where the brush ended with the shade. Alright, so moving on from that, we're going to go ahead and just add some white to the Warlock Purple and do all these highlights. So again, really, when it comes to highlights, you're essentially just tracing. You're doing all the outside edges and all the raised portions. And there's a lot here. There's a lot of texture that you're going to go over. So we're going to spend some time doing that. Again, make sure to put extra highlights as needed, or at least surface area in places where it makes sense, like towards the top of him. Okay, now this one, this miniature had this had broken off. This is supposed to be glued onto the side here, so I'm going to super glue it on. Now this is actually a commission miniature, so this was shipped to me and I have to ship it back. My regular miniature, this is not broken, and yours might not be too. But if it is, there you go. You're going to just glue it right back on there. And really, you should glue it on there. You don't have to. It'll just kind of sit there, but the blade comes directly off of the side of the robe there, so I'd encourage it. As you notice, I did get Druchii Violet out, and really I'm focusing on the edge, so I'm making the edge quite dark, and then I'm bringing that back into the pink, and what that does is it gets most of the shade off on the edge, so I have very, very little that I'm bringing it up, and as you can see, I'm just doing several passes. Ends up working a lot better. Next up is light green blue underneath here. So this was kind of interesting because, again with the concept art, the inside of the robes is 3 different colors on the concept art. In the sleeve, it's a very dark green. Then in the back, it looks like almost a green blue, but again darker. And then in the very front, where it's frilled up, it looks like this light green blue. And so what I decided to do, because I can't paint it all 3 colors, I mean, it wouldn't make sense, right? Is I'm going to paint it this light green blue, and then I'm going to darken it up, and I think that's a good happy medium between all 3. So let's darken it up with this dark tone. I'm going to end up coming back and bringing this color back a little bit just to clean it up, because this dark tone doesn't go over well on the bottom of the skirt. There's a little minor texture sculpt issues there that it kind of tends to pull in. Next up is black red for this kind of armor plating here. Now this is the exact same kind of armor, almost the exact same kind of armor that the Oni of Skulls has, and I've already painted him. In fact, he's my favorite miniature that I've ever painted, and I really like him. So if you haven't seen it, I highly suggest you watch that video because it's awesome. But he had stripes of this dark red and light red, whereas in this one, he has these light red, metal plates or metal shingles kind of splotched around. So I'm painting a little different here. So I'm just going to cover it all in this kind of dark red. Now I will say this is not dark enough to match the concept art, so we're going to darken it up a bit. Now before we darken that other portion, I'm going to go in and lighten this up, kind of like I said. Now I will say it's not a hard line on the robe there. It actually kind of curves a little bit. It's not super straight, and that means I end up getting a little green on the pink, which I then have to touch up. Okay, so we're going to take dark tone to that red that we put on there earlier, and really all I wanted to say here is a lot of times, and this adds a lot of texture, right? It pops out the kind of the texture as it sinks in, but you can use shade to shift the color too. In this case, I'm getting both out of this. I'm not going to highlight this up with that red. This is actually the base color I want. So sometimes, especially if you know how a wash is going to react to a paint, to where you know where the end result will be, you can use that to your advantage. So as I said, in the concept art, this is kind of splotchy, where about 80% of these are covered in this kind of brighter red. So I have the evil Sunz Scarlet out now. I'm just kind of quickly highlighting in batches and splotches about 80% of all of the metal tiles here. And this is really easy to do too. I mean, it's not hard. You just kind of, get a tiny brush and kind of swipe down on them a little bit, and that colors it pretty easy. Rough iron is out for the mask. I thought about just doing a dark gray, but I decided to go ahead and signify that I thought it was kind of a metal by using this rough iron. And I've never used the rough iron before, but I've always wanted to. I really like the dark silvers, the dark metal. I had lead belcher from Citadel. I still do, but it's not nearly this dark. This is dark, and I really dig that. So just a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that up with plate mail metal. If I was to do this again, I'd probably highlight it in shining silver because I use that elsewhere, and then I don't introduce another color just for some highlights. So the sides of his head here, I have black red back out for this binding here. The sides here are actually, they look like they're part of the armor, but they're inverted. Like they're not the same style, I suppose. I don't know, it's kind of weird. I didn't even notice this before. So now I have the evil Sunz Scarlet out. I'm gonna kind of color in the sides of that binding or kind of the bound metal plates here are. So the pole handle and the hat are going to be in this werewolf fur. I'm not going to highlight the hat at all. It's in such an odd shape that I feel either I'd highlight just the top, which is kind of silly, or I'd have to bring the highlight down a lot on the sides, which I don't think I'd be able to pull off well without it also looking silly. So no highlights here, just kind of, painting it brown. Next up is oak brown. This is just for the handles of his swords and his boots. Now, one of the reasons I like using so many colors is because I think it really sells the miniature a bit more without me doing really any extra work if I have the colors. Just having different browns instead of just one, I think is really helpful. Stuff like that really just makes it seem more like these are all different materials and textures, which is kind of nice and really just adds an overall complexity to the miniature without, again, really any effort besides I picked up a different color. And that, again, like I said, that complexity can really lead the eye just to sell the miniature more. I did add a bit of white to this to highlight the feet, and mostly I'm concerned about the toes there. You can highlight kind of the basic shape of the foot. I always like to highlight the heel as well. I'm not sure why, I just do. I don't think it should always be highlighted, but there I go. See, now I'm happy. Rakarth Flesh is out, and believe it or not, I've never used this as a skin tone. I always use it as kind of a it's not a tan, it's not a gray, it's an odd color. It's a unique color in it, and so I use it for that. So the binding texture here, there is some texture up here, but it's really lackluster. It's hard to see, it's very small. So I'm just kind of doing this checkerboard Rakarth Flesh to act as bindings, and I think it looks and works fine. Next up is Dark Stone. This is for kind of the the wraps in between his feet here or his toes, and this sort of little detail I think really helps. Otherwise his feet would look really blotchy with just being kind of dark brown. So adding this a little bit, I think, super beneficial. Wouldn't suggest skipping it. Next up, we're going to do the Scabbard, and we're starting with Emerald, which is a really fun color that I don't get to use as much as I'd like. This is going to be kind of a wet blended. I'm going to work a little quick here. In fact, it's all going to be one cut. The Scabbards here are really, really cool. I really like them. I think it's a lot of fun to have really colorful stuff like that. So this emerald is going to go into this deep blue. It's hard to see in the front because there's a rope binding there that I forgot about. I'll get that later. But the back, I think it works a bit more. But again, with his kind of sleeve there, it breaks the blend between the green and the blue. But we can blend the lava orange in. So the very end is going to be this kind of lava orange. And gosh, see, I don't know the color wheel very well. People can correct me. I believe orange and blue are complementary colors. Maybe I'm mistaken. Either way, supposedly I think they go well together. But yeah, so just kind of again playing around with the blending there. Wet gray back out for these ropes that I forgot about. So this is actually tied to his kind of rope belt so that they don't go anywhere. I think with how loose they're tied, I don't think he'd be able to walk with them hanging anywhere. But you know, whatever. They look cool. Greedy Gold is out, and this is going to be the single longest portion of the video, actually, just because there's so much to do. There's a lot of detail work here, a lot of trimming to do, and then actually there's going to be some shade and some highlights on this gold on top of that. And I kind of have to work slow on a lot of this because a lot of it's already painted, a lot of it's really small. But take your time, totally worth it. These sort of trimming, it's amazing how much trim adds to a miniature. So there's a lot of work here to do, but all of it worth it. So I'm going to go ahead and let it play out. I really am just going to be painting, besides the necklace, all the trim on, you know, all of his armor bits, and on his weapon, his kind of handle there. You know, the pommel and guards on his swords, and kind of that head, the top head ornament as well. Warlock Purple is back out. Now, see, I could have done this when I first had Warlock Purple out. And in hindsight, maybe that would have sped it up. The reason I didn't is because I was planning on wet blending this, and I do to an extent, especially in the waistcloth that he has still hanging down there. But these ribbons are so small that it is a little hard to do targeted wet blending here. Next up is Lava Orange. So this is going to be a pink to an orange to a yellow. So again, I'm going to take this orange out and I'm going to kind of blend it in a little bit. I'm going to end up glazing over this, and so we're gonna touch on that here in a bit, because really what I'm doing here is painting in the orange and then bringing it up into the pink, which isn't the best of blending techniques to do. Demonic Yellow is the yellow of choice here, and I really like this kind of splash of a super bright color. I wouldn't suggest doing any more than what I'm doing here, just the ends, just the like last, you know, 6th or 8th of the ribbons there, I think is plenty. Really nice touch to add that little bit of yellow. Reikland Flesh tone is out next, and this is to kind of shade in a lot of the bigger portions only of this kind of greedy gold. Now, I love doing Reikland Flesh tone on gold just because it is kind of a red brown, and both red and brown are found in gold pretty highly, so any kind of red based wash actually does pretty. I'm not saying you should do the red wash. I've actually never tried that. Maybe it'll work, I don't know. But this Reikland Flesh tone is kind of a red-brown and works fantastic on gold. I'm going to highlight that up straight with gold though, and this will kind of, the gold is close enough to where it's not too stark, but it is noticeable. Which means now I have my 3 kind of highlight levels, right? I have kind of the shaded portion, then I have the normal greedy gold, and then I have this gold highlight on top of that. Barbarian Flesh is going to be for just a little bit of skin that's showing. It's just really his bottom portion of his face and then his fingers, and really that's it. So and not a huge deal there, but it's mostly just going to be regular flesh, or you know, the Barbarian Flesh. I'm not going to shade it or even really highlight this a little bit. Warlock Purple is out now again, and this is going to be a glaze. So, in fact, I was talking about this with Manuel on Patreon before. He had brought up kind of why you use a glaze versus layering, and this is what I was talking about, Manuel, if you're watching this now. It's very watered down, and unlike a shade where it would pool into all these recesses, this glaze is just going to kind of cover over the raised portion and slightly tint it with whatever color I'm doing. So first I did the pink, and now I'm doing this orange and bringing it into the yellow. And what this does is it just kind of slightly blends the color a bit more. So that's kind of what I'm using here. You can see on my thumb how watered down this really is. It's very watered down. Speaking of which, if you'd like to be a part of Patreon and ask painting questions and see sneak peeks and behind the scenes and, you know, vote on miniatures and possibly even win miniatures based off milestones, stuff like that, by all means, check out the link in the description below. I'd highly appreciate it. Right now I'm using silver to highlight gold, and this is actually a nice technique I'm not sure I've done before, but I've known about. I'm really glad I did. If you use it as an edge highlight, it just looks like it's shining metallic, and it works really well with the gold. I'm really happy with it. Now I'm using shining silver here, and one of the nice things about that is I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to use it for the weapons as well, so I'm just going to paint right onto the weapons. Do you notice how it almost looks, you know, not pearlescent, but it looks super polished and shiny is what that makes the gold look like, which I really like. So yeah, I'm going to be doing that in the future just because that's a really easy way, I think, to highlight gold in a really nice way. Now I'm going to highlight the silver as well, and this is actually just adding white paint to it. So it'll lighten it up and make it, I guess, slightly less metallic, but it's not noticeable and really just looks like it's shining. I didn't want to darken this at all because in the concept art he has quite bright silver blades anyway, so this is just actually highlighting it up with a bit of white. So there's not a lot of texture to really do a lot of washes on the skin here, but I am taking a little bit of dark tone and actually just kind of placing it in his eye sockets to kind of darken them up a little bit before I put pupils in there. Let's go in and finish these tassels though. So I'm going to base coat them in this kind of burnt red, and then I'm going to highlight them in a very bright pure red. That'll be kind of a nice contrast and really add some texture to these because they're so small and finicky. You don't want it to look like a red blob, right? You want it to look like a tassel. So there are two on either side of all four of his armor plates there. As promised, here's a pure red, so I'm just going to kind of highlight it, and this is just by hand highlighting, just a real quick, you know, here's a strand here, and a strand here, and a knot, right, and that's it. Abaddon Black is going to be used for the pupils, and this is so tiny. Best of luck with this. It's really, really small. I think I do a pretty good job. They're at least looking in the same direction. So Sterling Mud is going to be on the base here, but I don't want it to look like mud. So I'm going to do a heavy dry brush of a much lighter color, just to kind of make it look a bit more like earth or soil versus wet, nasty mud. But either way, I'm going to cover this all the way up. One of the reasons I always try to use these texture paints, if I can, on these bases is just because it's so quick and easy and makes it look a lot nicer than just paint. Pastel blue is the first color I'm choosing for the first detail I'm painting. Now, one of the problems about this is I think the pastel blue is the correct color as far as the concept art is concerned, but in real life, I think this is much harder to see. You can see it fine here right now, but notice this is not how close you are to these miniatures when you're playing the board game. And so really, I don't think you're going to see this at all on the table itself. That being said, that doesn't mean your eye doesn't see it. So there's a lot to say about, kind of like what I talked about, adding different browns and stuff like that. Adding overall complexity to these miniatures, I think, is kind of nice, and it kind of sells the miniature because your eyes just get this information, an overall sense of whether or not it makes sense or not. Speaking of which, that's also why I chose the beige here. So he just has two little symbols on the collars here that are a little different, and so I went ahead and painted those as well. I also totally forgot to paint the straps on for his armor, so they're not just floating there, they're not glued onto his shoulders, they're strapped around his arms. Next up is white gray for some flowers. Now I'm going to actually come back a bit later and add some more. So the concept art again only shows the front, so I don't know what the back looks like, and I end up thinking the back needs to have these flowers all the way up it, based a little bit on what I could see on the concept art on his sides, and it just looks like it makes sense. So don't paint too many of these. This is not the only detail work I'm painting here, and just kind of put them sporadic and make sure they're not level with each other. Next up is Nuln Oil. This is going to be on the base. The reason, by the way, I keep doing the base and coming back to it is because I want to do the base as I paint the miniature, because if I don't, then I have to finish the miniature, put the Sterling Mud on, wait for that to dry and do nothing, and then put the Nuln Oil on, wait for that to dry, and then do nothing. If I do this now, while that dries, I can actually still paint the miniature and make progress on it. It's just less wasted time. Deep blue is the next color, and this is going to be stippled on. So the concept art has this crazy, insane level of detail design pattern that I can't possibly paint. I'm sure somebody probably could, but that person is not me at all. So, like I said, with this kind of stippling, I'm mostly following the purple wash I've already put there, and I think that really helps sell this. But I do end up kind of going out a little bit just so it doesn't look so rigid. And overall, I think that it ends up working really, really well and looks really nice. Okay, so again, I'm going to add some more flowers. This is just more white gray flowers going up the sides and the back. Flat Earth is going to be my heavy dry brush here. Like I said, I don't want this to really look like mud per se. I just want it to look like maybe soil, if I can help it. And I think this kind of bright brown with even a little bit of green in it, if my guess is right, really helps kind of sell that. Last bit of detail here, Mechanica Standard Gray, some more flowers. This guy loves his flowers on his pants. So I have these talus gray rocks. They're just used for like miniature scenery and whatnot. I grabbed 3 of them. I grabbed the crazy glue. Barely have any of this stuff left, not because I'm painting a ton of miniatures with it, but because it's my super glue, so I fix a lot of kid toys with it. Anyway, you just get a dab of it, and then you press it down there. These rocks are a bit heavier because they're not made of cork. I think they're actually kind of real, and so I want to make sure that they stick on the base well, and so this super glue will really help with that. Next up from Green Stuff World is Static Grass Flock, and Green Stuff World, by the way, is an awesome company. I really like everything I've bought from them. They have some really cool stuff online that's just really fun to play with, and so I can finally use this grass. This grass is kind of darker, but it has a little bit of light in it. It reminds me of like a wasteland or apocalyptic kind of grass, which I thought fit this quite well. So that was this watered down regular, Elmer's, white PVA glue that I would brushed on kind of sporadically. Then I'm putting the flock on and using a toothpick to kind of shove it down to make sure it's there. But really what I wanted to do was stand up around the rocks, so it looks like the rocks are pushing the grass out and around it, and I think I get that really, really well. That effect ended up nicely. Emperor's Children is what I'm going to be painting all of the Lotus base rims in. I think this is really closely matches their clan color, so this is going to be the clan color. But as you know, this is a Daimyo, and so it needs both the clan color and black, and so I'm going to go ahead and take this Abaddon black and just draw a kind of a rim at the bottom. Now this takes a lot of time. There's probably other ways to do it that are better, time efficient wise, right? Like the poker chip ones that I used to do. This one does end up looking a bit cleaner and looks a little nice. Just take your time definitely and do a good job at first. I always have to touch it up, or always choose to touch it up, and that'll be off camera, and you don't want to do too much of that just because it takes a lot of time. Alright, let's matte varnish this several times. It's now matte varnished several times. Here is the finished miniature, guys. I really enjoyed painting this guy. He's awesome. He's so colorful, and I made the base kind of this kind of darker base, and I thought that was a fun kind of thing to do with these brightly colored miniatures, to then be on this really dark base and kind of have that kind of opposition of color assaulting your eyes there. And looking at the other miniatures, they look very kind of bandity almost. So I think this basing will work well there. Anyway, guys, I really enjoyed painting this. There was over 3 hours of footage. It was easily 5.5 hours of painting, so it was a big undertaking. I mean, this is like painting a ton of miniatures in an hour and a half, or 2 hours. So a lot of work here. And I hope you did enjoy it. If you did, please go ahead and give me a thumbs up. That really actually helps the video and the channel, believe it or not, and costs you nothing. Let me know in the comments below if you did like this, if you would have done something differently, especially around the details and the wet blending and stuff like that. Maybe what you want to see next. If you want to have more control of what you want to see painted next, by the way, I do have a Patreon. You can see some of the people here. I want to thank all of my patrons, obviously. They're awesome, and they help me bring a lot of content to this channel, whether it's product, whether it's paints or basing material, or even games or brushes. Just all of that is all thanks to you guys. So thank you so much for your support. So you can actually help choose what's painted next. That's a reward on Patreon. You can possibly win some miniatures that I paint. See some sneak peeks. There's a lot of stuff there you can look at, but really, if you feel inclined to support, I'd always appreciate it. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for your views and your kind words in the comments. You guys have been an awesome community, and I've really enjoyed painting these miniatures for you guys. So anyway, this is the finished miniature. I hope you liked this video, and I will talk to you again soon.